Hi, I'm Ed Rosenberg and welcome to AgeWise. It used to be the responsibility of younger family members to care for their elders. It was just what you did. Then we went through the era when retired adults lived on their own in retirement communities or institutions with others their own age. But now, as we're living longer, we're in the caregiver era, back to family care for older adults. Today, our guests are from the High Country Caregivers Foundation, our friend Brenda Reese and Bunny Burke Eilers. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
You know, America's population growth is unprecedented as baby boomers enter their older years. In fact, in North Carolina, by 2020, 85 of our 100 counties will have over 15% of their population age 65 and over. And by 2030, nationally and in North Carolina, it'll be 20%. 1 out of every 5 people is going to be a senior citizen. So the need for programs and services for older people is going to be greater than ever before, but at the same time, government funding for these programs is stagnant or even declining. So what happens? Programs and services have to do more with less, but you can only do that for so long. And eventually, more and more older people are going to be cared for outside the formal care system, which means by family and friends. In fact, already 80% of elder care is provided informally, unpaid by family and friends, and the strains on caregivers are huge, and we'll be talking about some of those today. So today we're looking at informal elder care, the dimensions of it, the challenges it poses for families and communities, the toll it can take on caregivers, and the potential to do a better job. Brenda, let's start with you, and let's start by talking about caregivers. What kinds of people are most likely to be providing care for older family members?
Nowadays, about 30% of us are in a caregiving role. What I see here in this region, it's usually a woman, and it is usually the oldest daughter or the last one to leave the family home is kind of what I see. A lot of the people we serve, it's husbands caring for their wives, it's adult children caring for their parents. Some are moving their parents. I just got a call this morning from a gentleman who's relocating his parents to Ashe County. I wanted to know what available services were out there.
So there are an awful lot of people providing care for older family members. Most of these are women.
Most are women.
About 2/3. Many of them care for more than one person. It may be an adult daughter caring for her aging parents. And what we're seeing also is that elder care providers themselves are getting older. We have older people caring for their spouses with increased longevity. We have parents in their 90s, and so their retired children may be caring for them. Well, what are the different kinds of roles that a caregiver has to play? What's a caregiver have to do?
Wow. They have to do a vast array, beginning with, it usually starts out with someone, your parents need a ride to the doctor, or they need help getting groceries, or it's no longer safe for them to take a bath in the home by themselves. It most frequently starts out with help with the transportation, medications, those things, but it quickly leads to needing assistance with their personal care. So it's bathing, it's toileting, it's just getting them up out of the chair, it's fixing their meals, it's making sure their medications, it's a little bit of everything. It's almost like, well, and it depends on who you're caring for. If it's someone with dementia, then it's more supervision and cueing. It's time to take your bath now, or it's time to take your medicine. So what starts out as a simple task usually snowballs, and often before long the person's moved in and it's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job.
Well, Bunny, let's get some personal perspective here. You not only have worked with the High Country Caregiver Foundation, but you have extensive personal caregiving experience with your family. Tell us a little bit about your story.
At the moment, I'm in my 4th round of caregiving families with terminal illness. And it started back when I graduated from nursing school. I took a leave of absence to stay with my grandmother who had breast cancer. And years later, I had to quit work to care for my father with lung cancer in another state. And then my mother in the other state I had to bring to live with me here in my home. And she didn't come to live with me, she came to die with me. There's a big difference. And now 2 years after my mother died from Alzheimer's, my husband's been diagnosed. So he's now in the moderate stage of dementia, Alzheimer's.
So it's been one caregiving scenario after another for you. It's like the other shoe keeps dropping, maybe from a centipede. And you're wondering how many shoes are there to drop?
Are left. And earlier you were talking about a designated family caregiver. It's like a designated driver. Usually someone in the family is going to be the designated caregiver by default, either a nurse, daughter.
It often happens that way. Brenda, what are the different ways that caregiving can affect the caregiver's life? What kinds of effects do we tend to see in people providing care for an older family member?
It affects every part of your life, basically, starting with your relationships with other family members. Financially, it can affect your own finances, emotionally, your feelings. Often after it's been a while, I get phone calls from caregivers who are distraught, they feel awful, they feel guilty because they've gotten short with their mother or father, and then they feel guilty because they were quick-tempered. And the other type of caregiving is grandparents raising grandchildren as well, and that is, your friends change. People don't want to hang out with people with small children. Your relationships, again, so much is affected by caregiving. I've been a caregiver twice, and it pretty much affected every aspect of my life. It's a hard job. It's the hardest job I've ever had to do. Thank God we have people like Bunny to care for their loved ones. I doubt I could have lasted much longer than I did in the situation that I was in.
Well, there are certainly, you've mentioned a tremendous number of things that can happen because of caregiving. There can be emotional strains, there can be stresses to your physical health, there can be financial consequences. You talked about how family relationships can change between caregiver and care recipient, but perhaps also between caregiver and siblings. Friendship networks can change. People may have to adjust their work hours or quit work entirely. Bunny, did you go through any of these kinds of things, any of these kinds of experiences?
Sure. Oh, sure. Probably the most difficult was the change in relationship with my mother, parent-child, where many other people are experiencing this, where there is a point where you've got to take charge of that parent's life for their own safety and well-being, but you can't order them, you can't make them, you can't try to outsmart them. It's very difficult. It's a very, very rocky road. And that's the part of this aging process that our children don't understand. Because they say, well, I've got 3 kids, I'm carpooling every day of the week, how hard can it be? Children progress each day, each week, each month, each year. They get better. When you're caregiving a terminal person, they are getting less independent each day, and you never know what bad surprises you're going to get in that declining situation. So even though both situations with small children to carpool at home and a caregiver with an elderly person, they're not equal, but our children's generation don't really understand that yet.
How do you find the positive in this? There must be some positive outcomes of getting into a caregiving relationship with a family member.
With the 4 relatives that I've had, and I would say privileged, to walk with them this last mile, you become closer in many ways, even if you've had difficulty with that person during your well years. I think you become more compassionate. You become more self-critical because, like Brenda said, you lose patience, and there are days when you just want to lock yourself in the car to have just a few minutes to yourself. But I found that, especially now with my husband and my 3 stepchildren, my daughter, the kids are getting more compassionate. And I'm trying to take this as an opportunity to teach them about the difficulties and challenges of getting older. My mother used to say, getting old is not for sissies. Well, there's a lot to that, but as I am learning things, I'm trying to share it with the kids with emails and phone calls and let them know what they're going to encounter with their spouse at some point, or with us, writing parents.
And it seems very important to make this an intergenerational kind of project. I hate to use a cliche, teachable moment, but there are a lot of teachable moments in caregiving, and to the extent that we can help the younger generation in general, our younger family members in particular, realize what's happening, what's the good, what's the bad, what's practical, what are the best ways to look at this, we're setting them up to be more compassionate toward aging and older people in the future.
That's what we hope.
That's what we hope.
And a good case in point is this last month, my husband had to have an emergency surgery on his bladder. So he came home with a catheter. Well, I'm constantly sending kids emails and photographing, so I took a picture of his catheter bag strapped to his leg, emailed it to the 4 children. One of them came back and went, "Oh, Mom, that is so gross. I can't believe you did that." And I went, "Welcome to Life 101. This is reality." So you get all sorts of reactions from your kids when you try to involve them in the process here.
And children can accept this. They're a lot more perceptive and accepting and resilient than we think they are, and often it's a question of how do you present this. If you're panicking, they're going to panic. If you're practical and realistic, then they're going to be the same way. There are clearly a lot of strains with caregiving. It hasn't been formally recognized in this nation as a social issue or a social problem for too many years. It was only in 2000 that the National Family Caregiver Support Program was implemented. And in fact, Brenda, that's what you do as one of your roles at the Area Agency on Aging. You're the Family Caregiver Support Specialist. But also in our neck of the woods is the High Country Caregivers Foundation, which you also direct. So let's talk about the foundation. What's its mission, and how do you go about trying to achieve your goals?
So the High Country Caregiver Foundation, it was created because of the reasons that you spoke about earlier. The funding streams are drying up. There's not enough money. The government doesn't have enough money to send paid employees into care. So we created it. Its mission is to raise awareness of caregiving issues, improve the quality of life for the caregiver as well as those they care for through information and assistance, advocacy, emotional support, and most importantly through providing respite opportunities for the caregiver to get a break from their caregiving so that they can tend to their own well-being. It's real important for caregivers to take advantage of those breaks. It enables them to go on and care longer, and that's why the National Family Caregiver Support Program came into effect. We were fortunate enough to realize early on that we couldn't depend on government funding, and of course with government funding there's also a lot of hoops you have to jump through. There's criteria, and we have caregivers that aren't 60, that aren't eligible through the Older Americans Act, or caregivers that are receiving hospice. With government funds, I couldn't serve them with National Family Caregiver Support Funds because they have a respite benefit with their hospice benefit. However, that's not always the best thing. That's for institutional respite, and sometimes people at the end of life, that's the last thing they want to do is go to a facility. That's one of their greatest fears. So if it gives them extra comfort by us giving them a voucher and allowing them to stay in the home, then that's what we want to do. So it gives us the freedom to serve who we feel we need to, rather than what the Older Americans Act mandates. My target population still has to be people that are eligible through the Older Americans Act. But we're just thrilled with the success of the program thus far. We have awarded now, I believe, over $550 $500 respite vouchers. It's now in all 7 of our counties. Last year.
You mentioned a lot of functions of the foundation, and you've been focusing on respite, but I would agree that respite is probably the most important. People get stressed doing things. I mean, we get stressed at work and we get vacations. But somehow when we get into a family caregiving situation, we don't think that we're entitled to vacations, but that's exactly what respite provides, whether it's for a few hours or a day or a weekend. Bunny, did you have any experience with respite support while you were a caregiver?
Oh, I did. And one of the big surprises of being this caregiving situation is the number of volunteers there are in this community, and I'm sure it's common throughout the country. The first surprise I got was how many people stepped up and said, I want to help you. Let me help you. I'll come to your house. I'll stay with your mother Tuesday and Thursday, 2 to 4, and you go pay bills, take a nap, go to the Y, whatever you need to do. And Kay Deckard was the first one to really step forward, and she had just retired from the county hospice. And so she said, look, I don't have a volunteer job anymore. You need a volunteer. I'm stepping up. And then there was Rachel Deal at the senior center, and she took my mother under her wing in their respite care on Fridays from 10 to 2. And my mother was a pretty feisty person, very resistive to the whole process, but Rachel just covered her up in love and just made her feel so special. And every Friday, she was right with my mother, and my mom would wake up and say, is this a Rachel day? And she'd wake up and say, is this a Kay day? So we had Kay days and Rachel days. And then Jean Ray was a former school teacher who developed the program, the respite program at the senior center. And it's one day a week for 4 or 5 hours. And she just does a magnificent job with her school teaching background of entertaining and containing the group. She takes them on bus trips. Just an amazing person. And one day I was in church with my husband, and I had someone at home with my mother, and this lady came up to me and said, I've seen you in the senior center with your mother coming for the free lunches, and I really want to help you. I'll come by on Wednesdays after I play Mahjong, and I'll fix your mother lunch, stay with her for 3 hours, and you can do whatever you need to. And so Ann Foster started coming every Wednesdays after she played her games and fixed my mother lunch and stayed with her. And then my dentist, Carol Schaefer, I was in her office, and she had just worked on my mother and was working on me, and she could see I had a difficult situation. And she said, have you applied for a High Country Caregiver Foundation voucher? And I went, what's that? She says, well, our foundation raises money, and with that money we award $500 vouchers to caregivers that they can take to a home health agency and pay for caregivers to come to the home to stay with your relative while you take a break. And I went, yeah, really, there's no Santa Claus. I'm thinking this in my mind. And she said, well, you need to fill out an application. You can get it online. I went, oh, my printer's down. I have to go get a new printer. She said, wait, I'll go print one out right here. So she put her tools down and went in her office and got online and printed out an application. She said, now you fill this out and you bring it back to me and I'll give it to Brenda, which is Brenda Reese here. I said, okay. So I filled it out, took it back to her, and she said, I'm glad you brought it back, because if you hadn't, I was going to call you and follow up. I went, well, I'm glad I did. But when you first hear about free services, free vouchers, you kind of think, yeah, Virginia, there's no Santa Claus. But this in fact is there. That's how I became aware of High Country Caregiver Foundation. And once I received one of those vouchers, saw how it worked, used them for CNAs to come stay with my mother, to give me a couple hours at a time to get out. I became a believer, joined the High Country Caregiving Caregiver Foundation and worked with them until my husband was diagnosed, and then I had to back off.
It sounds like at first the caregiving support you got, the respite support you got was informal, and then later you found out about the High Country Caregiver Foundation, which is a little more formal. Did you immediately see these volunteers and these respite vouchers as a godsend, or were there any feelings of guilt and abandoning the person you were caring for?
My first reaction was, these are angels in the high country. And you do have some reluctance of giving up the caregiving role, in particular with my situation, since I was the nurse in the family, the psychiatric nurse when my mother was first diagnosed, and I'm picking her because it was the most intensive and difficult situation. It went on for 2 years in my home, 6 months at her home before that. I had promised my parents I'd never put them in a nursing home. So you have that commitment, and when my mom was first diagnosed, I went, well, this is going to be difficult. But I took care of my grandmother. I took care of my dad with lung cancer. And okay, I'm a psychiatric nurse. I can handle this, or I was in my first career. And I'm a nurse, so I can handle it. Hardest, like Brenda said, hardest job I've ever done, because I forgot that when you're a nurse, you're 8 hours on and you go home. And you have 2 other shifts taking care of that patient. When you're a caregiver in your own home, it's 24/7. They wake you up. They have needs in the middle of the night. They wake you up. They're either physical needs or they're emotional needs of my mother coming in. I want you to get my CDs out of your computer. What have you done with my CDs? Mom,
So with
they're in your bank
caregiving,
box.
you're always on call. There's
Exactly.
never rest, but the respite, it seems like eventually you got used to that. Brenda, if people are interested in this, if they're caring for a family member, they want to get in touch with the High Country Caregivers Foundation and find out what the foundation can do for them, is there a phone number they can use? Is there a website?
There's both of those. The phone number is 828-265-5434, extension 128. That is the High Country Council of Governments offices. Our website is highcountrycaregiverfoundation.org, or you can use hccgf.org. It is currently under construction, so if you try to pull it up in the next week or so, it'll say it's under construction.
Okay.
Please
Well,
call
why
me.
don't you repeat the phone number for us?
265-5434, extension 128, or the best way to reach me is by email, and that's B as in boy, Reese, REECE, @regiond.org.
Okay, thank you. And this foundation, I mean, you do a lot of good things, but you need resources to do that. You need money. Where does the money come from?
It comes through fundraising. All the money used for direct services is money we raise or get grants. We have several fundraisers planned.
Well, do you have one coming up?
We have two coming up. The main one is it's called the Peter Padroni Memorial Charity Golf Tournament.
I believe we have a graphic for that, if we can get that up there. But tell us a little bit more about that golf tournament.
Casa Rustica started doing a golf tournament about 9 years ago, and they used to always pick a different nonprofit to give the proceeds to. We were approached and fortunate enough that they have chosen us, and because we're willing to help them in the fundraising efforts, they have now decided we will be the benefactor of those funds each year, and that's coming up August the 20th. It'll be at Boone Golf Course. There is a prime rib dinner the night before. That's new this year. Going to be catered by Casa Rustica at the golf course, and there'll be auctions and raffles. We've got some great things to raffle off. A Bubba Watson autograph pink ping driver for all you golfers out there, and some other things. And Bunny has always been very generous after her involvement in that she actually lets us auction off a vacation place she has, and that has generated thousands of dollars of revenue to us.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I wish you every success. Hope you raise lots and lots of money. To start to wrap up, caregiving is a huge issue in the 21st century. I think we have a graphic that shows a quote from Rosalind Carter, that there are 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. It's going to affect all of us. As the population ages, more and more older people are going to need caregiving, and more of us will find ourselves in the caregiver role. Is this stressful? Certainly, Bunny, you've told us that yes, it is, and Brenda, you have too. But there are educational programs available, training programs available, respite programs available, other ways to improve caregiver effectiveness and reduce caregiver stress. The High Country Caregiver Foundation is certainly one of those. For more information, such as links to the Alzheimer's Association and AARP, you can go to App State's gerontology website, aging.appstate.edu, and go to the resources page. And I encourage you and your family and friends to be aware of these and take advantage of them. They're for you, they're free, or they're very low cost. And the better a caregiver we become, the more likely we are to see more and more of caregiving's positive possibilities. Well, that's our AgeWise program for this week. I'm Ed Rosenberg.